Hello, everyone. I'm Deb Brown, and I'm the Associate Director at the Explorer School in downtown Raleigh. I'd like to share with you in this presentation a little bit of what I've learned over the years in working in digital teaching and learning environments. Now, when we talk about terms like digital learning, we really tend to encompass a whole bunch of different things. You may have heard this called e-learning or remote learning, distance learning. It may have been referred to as virtual classrooms, flipped classrooms. You may hear terms like learning management systems, personalized, synchronous, and even up to MOOCs, which are massive open online courses. So there's lots of different things that can encompass this term when we use the idea of digital teaching and learning. And what I'm here to tell you today is that that's not what this is. What we are in now as a country is a survival situation. Most of you did not train to have a digital classroom. You didn't ask for this. The kids did not ask to be part of a virtual school. The families didn't ask to be homeschooling at this point. The community didn't ask to have the school shut down. This is kind of the difference between being an Olympic swimmer who's trained for years and is ready for an event and being someone who just got thrown off the back of the boat and is trying to keep the water from rising up too far over their heads. So I want to tell you that before you start worrying about the tech things and all the different platforms and planning your lessons, that you really want to begin with connections and with a sense of grace about the whole process. I told my team when we went into digital teaching and when we went into a remote learning situation that they had three main tasks. The first was to keep the kids connected to them, to stay as their teacher with someone that they could count on. The second was to do your best to keep them connected to each other so they had this sense of community and they could still interact with their peers. And finally, to keep them connected to a love of learning and to that joy of discovery. Some of the things we need to realize is that every kid is facing a really different home environment. Not everyone has parents who are home full time to work with them. Some of the parents are trying to work from home. There's access to technology. There's just so many different things that play into it. Remember that the younger the child is, the more trouble they're going to have just setting up the laptop and turning things on. And then a lot depends on what kind of executive functioning that student is capable of. Some students already understand how to open their emails, how to organize a calendar, and others are really struggling with just that aspect of learning before they can even begin to get to your curriculum. And then finally, as a nation, we're really all in a time of trauma and grief. I think most of us go back and forth between sort of two scripts in our heads. And one is that we are these wonderful teachers in one of those movies where the teacher comes in and saves the day and that we're doing these great lessons from home and adapting. And then the second one is a survival horror story, right? Are we going to be okay? Is our family going to be okay? So please recognize that your families and your students are also going back and forth that on the day-to-day basis, they're dealing with the ordinary things that they're worried about with school or enjoying about school. And then underneath are these deep fears as we watch the news and the headlines and worry about what's happening everywhere. So if you keep that in mind, if you begin with this idea that your main purpose is to keep your kids connected and to have some sense of understanding of what everyone is processing, you'll be doing a great job. So if you're like me and our teachers, as soon as we started looking at going to remote learning situation, it seemed like everywhere we turned, someone was sharing with us another idea. Here's this great website. Here's this great app. Here's a celebrity reading books to your kids. Here's a museum that's doing a virtual tour. And it just becomes so much that it gets to be overwhelming. So I'm here to tell you that particularly when you get started, stick with the familiar, stick with the things that you're comfortable with, stick with the things that your students are already familiar with, and really try to limit the number of platforms and new apps and things that you're trying to introduce. If you're looking at lots of great ideas, this is a great time to start keeping a list, put them in a chart. If you're a Pinterest person, create your Pinterest board and then visit those as you go. But remember, every new thing that you introduce, you're also going to have to teach remotely to your students. So really, it's okay, particularly at the beginning, to keep everything simple and familiar. And then as you get more comfortable, it may be time to start exploring some of those great options that you keep hearing about. So I'm a big advocate for digital teaching and learning. I think there's an awful lot in the pedagogy of digital learning that can be really effective for kids. Most of us, though, now in this emergency situation are learning some of the strengths that digital teaching has, and you can make really great use of them. So we usually talk about things like time, place, path, and pace. The technology means that, as you know, you don't have to be in the same place with your students. They don't all have to be doing the exact same thing at the same time, and you can really let them kind of go at their own pace. There's this opportunity for differentiation, for students to have playlists, for students to find, maybe read an article or watch a video, depending on the modality that works best for them. So there's a lot of great things about digital teaching and learning that make it really great for this particular type of situation. So don't get so overwhelmed with the technology that you lose track of what makes good teaching. So you always want to begin with the end in the mind, with your end in mind. Start with your standards. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And then look at what is success going to look like? How will I know when the students have learned this or mastered this? Digital learning and thinking does require a bit of a shift in your thinking, though. One way that can be really effective is to start thinking not what lesson do I want to teach, but what experience do I want my students to have? How am I designing this for them to have this learning experience? Then you can start by exploring the resources that you do have available, keeping in mind again that there's so much out there, you don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far. Plan what the students are going to do, embed the feedback right in the process, and then again, the idea of assessment. How are you going to measure competency? What evidence are the students going to be able to show that they've actually got mastery of your objective? My preferred method of teaching is in the blended classroom, where the students do some of the work outside of class through the technology, and then they come back to class to work together on those kinds of collaborative project-based sorts of assignments. In this environment, they have to do everything on their own, but it's kind of helpful to keep in mind this idea of how that flipped model can apply in the digital world. So if you think about Bloom's taxonomy, what technology can do is kind of flip that. Down at the easiest access levels, we have things like your understanding and remembering, and that's something that the kids can do pretty well independently. Then in a blended model, they'd come back to class to do the application, the evaluation, the creation, those higher level skills. In the digital world, though, you can give students these kinds of sort of easier tasks, these lower level things. That might be a video that you want them to watch, a direct lesson that you teach online, an article you'd like them to read, and those things they can do fairly independently. And then what the teacher's task is to chunk these higher level ones into simpler forms. So you want to think about giving students more time and giving super clear directions to get them to do these more complicated tasks. Now, particularly in a digital environment, you have to be super clear. It's the only way to really be kind to your kids. So, really think about getting your schedules and calendars set up. I recommend a fair amount of redundancy in your information. Have a document that's the calendar that they always look at, but then send that as an email every day as well, and then send it to a kid in a chat or in a text. The more places that they have that they can find this information, the easier it will be for them to not always have to keep searching. Think about how you can simplify or chunk all of your information. Have some time that kids can drop in or families can drop in to ask questions, whether that's an office hour that you just say, hey, I'll be available online, send me a note, send me a chat during this time, or some sort of a help hall where students can come by and ask questions. You want to be super clear about what it means to be in attendance. Now, this may change with your district, may have those policies, but if you're going to count a kid as being a part of the class that day, what is it they have to do? Do they have to show up to an online class? Do they have to complete an assignment by a particular date? Are you using a check-in form of some kind? There's lots of different methods to do that. Be really clear about what work is actually required and what you're suggesting might be optional or extra practice. We all have those kids that we know are perfectionists and they want to do absolutely everything. And if you give them a giant list of material, they'll try to work through the whole thing and they'll be really stressed thinking they were supposed to do that. So it's really great to let kids know that this is the base that we expect you to do. Then once you've done that, if you have the time, if you have the inclination, if you have the curiosity, here are some extra things that you could go explore. And finally, just be patient. You'll probably have to repeat things a number of times as different kids come into the process at different points. It's just as in general in teaching, we know that there's often a lot of repetition. Be ready to repeat in the digital world as well. Now, part of being clear in this environment also means partnering with the parents. It might be a good idea to schedule a family call and really ask if there's parents or adults in the room who are helping the kids who can be there when you're starting a new unit, when you're teaching about how to use a particular piece of material. It's a great Make sure that you're keeping touch with your families about how they're doing. Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it just right? You got to find that kind of Goldilocks point. Uh, think low tech sometimes. For some people, just pick up the phone and make a phone call. Send a card home to a family and just to stay in touch. Recognize again that there are lots of different pressures on families. We have one family that the kids weren't coming to class at all. We weren't seeing them, but we noticed in the afternoon that they would often get online and they were completing lots of their work. When we talked to the family about it, we found out Mom said, I'm not waking them up. They'll sleep until 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, and I can get up at 6 a.m. and put in 4 or 5 hours on my job before they're even awake and I have to deal with them. So remember again that these families are dealing with limited devices, limited spaces, and at this point, limited patience as well. So try to solve those problems together that you're noticing in any kid that seems to be struggling and work with the families. Okay, so some of your basics to get it started. The first thing that you're going to need is some sort of a learning management system. Now, you may already be using something as a district, but this could be as simple as an email that you send out daily that has the directions and the links in it. It's just any place that you're putting all of your directions and your resources so that the students and the kids and the families can find it. It might be a shared Google Doc, you might be using Google Classroom, or you might be using any one of a number of platforms that are available for helping you keep all of your teaching materials organized. Really think about using choices and playlists. This gives you lots of different modalities, different ways that kids can access the information, and it's kind of important if you can to have at least some of the material come directly from you. It's just there's nothing like having your teacher's own face, expressions, gestures, to hear that voice to help a student understand a concept. You may have some brilliant scholars who have taught some online lessons. You may have some great fancy edited videos, but that doesn't substitute for that connection with the face that they know. So when you can, try to at least have some online teaching that you're doing or some videos that you record so the kids can just still see and hear from you. You want to, where you can, limit synchronous learning and expectations. On one hand, it's really great to have everybody together in that call and to see all the little faces and to hear everybody and to let them talk to each other. At the same time, you have to recognize that not every student wants to appear on camera. Not every student wants their house to show up behind them in a video. Not every student has someone who's willing to wake them up in the morning. They may be sharing laptops and sharing resources. So when you require kids to all be at the same place at the same time, you are kind of limiting the access that some students may have to that educational experience. The other thing you want to do is make feedback a priority. This goes to those connections again. So you want to make sure that as the students are doing things that you are responding to that, even if it's a simple check-in that they say, yes, I did this, I see that my teacher got it, and that keeps that feedback loop going. If you're having online meetings, there are some things that can make it go more smoothly. If you're using something like Zoom that has a waiting room, that's a great way to sort of ensure that the people who are coming into the space are the students that you expect to come in. We had a situation where we had a former student that we found was attending some of our 8th grade math classes. He'd gotten the code from one of his friends and he just was bored. His school had not started online learning yet, and he just was attending class. There have also been, you may have heard of the infamous now Zoom bombs, where people with not so nice intentions are showing up to classrooms and causing problems. So I think it's a good idea to use those waiting room features. Ask your students to use their real names, not to try to sign in with nicknames, so you always know who's in your space. It can be really helpful to assign a co-host, either a fellow teacher who can help manage the chat, manage the wait room, and let people in as they go and answer questions. Or this can be a great chance to use one of your students as a leader. Ask a kid if they can be a co-host for the meeting, if they can help take notes, if they can help monitor who's in chat, if they can text a kid who's saying, where's that Zoom link? I can't figure out where I'm supposed to be, and manage that so you can stay connected to your students and teaching your lessons. It's a great idea to set up what your norms are going to be for online. And different districts, again, may have different requirements for this. But one of the things we found is effective is to always enter the meeting with your microphone muted to make sure that you don't have any distracting backgrounds or noises. I know kids like to play with those virtual backgrounds and things, but we've kind of discouraged that because it becomes too distracting. in general, avoid eating on camera. It can be really offensive to some people to be watching that chewing happening. To be dressed in some fashion, probably not coming to school to your online school in your pajamas, and then to not be engaging in private or side chats as much as possible to limit that. The same way you would in a classroom. You wouldn't want kids to show up in their robe with their breakfast cereal still in hand and texting or talking to the friends at the next table. You may want to think about whether or not you want to require students to turn on their cameras. And again, this may be a district policy for you. And on one hand, it's really great to see their faces, just as it's important for them to see you. They like to see each other, and it'll help you feel more connected to them if you can see them as well. Some of our teachers have talked about teaching into the void, where they're just looking at this screen and it's nothing but these black boxes all over, and they can't hear anything and they can't see anything. And that can be really disconcerting for the teacher. But also, again, be sensitive to that comfort level that they have on camera, the home environment, trauma that they may feel at, having to look at themselves all the time. And then in some cases, our staff is reporting that discipline has actually gotten a little bit easier. In the classroom, it may be difficult to get a chatty student to calm down. In an online environment, you just hit that mute button. You can send them out to the waiting room if they're getting too disruptive or asking, things that are off topic. Let them go refocus before they come back in, sort of the digital version of asking them to step into the hallway. And you can even do a one-day pause on participation. It's almost like, putting them in isolation at this point to not be able to come to class. But there are things that you can do if you have students who are trying to derail what you're trying to accomplish with the group. As I mentioned earlier, I really do recommend that the teachers spend at least part of their time on camera. Again, just the importance of the students being able to see your body language, to hear your voice, it will help them better process the lessons as well as feeling less alone. It gives them that sense of normalcy that some things are continuing. If you're uncomfortable or if your district policy is to not have online lessons at the same, synchronous lessons, live lessons, do some pre-recorded videos. I'm making this presentation with a platform called VoiceThread, but there's everything from Screencastify to iMovie. There's lots of different ways to make these videos and to record your materials. I do want to kind of remind everyone, though, that as teachers, we are still mandatory reporters. If it should happen that you saw something in a video that made you feel that the child was in danger in some way, that there was something in the home environment that just made you uncomfortable, this is a great time to reach out to your administration, reach out to your counseling team, and let them set the steps in motion to find out what's going on. You want to maintain a semi-professional video presence. Obviously, we're not in the classroom anymore, so you can go a little bit more casual. I think the kids like seeing the teachers in their hoodies and the backwards hats and everything. But you do kind of want to check and see what's in the background, right? You don't want to film in front of your wine rack, for example, or be careful what the posters on your wall might say where you're filming. But it is okay to be personal. One of the nice things about this environment is the kids get introduced to your pets, your children, spouses who run through the back of the video, and they probably will really love seeing that side of you, just as they'll probably enjoy showing off those parts of their lives to you as well. And then in general, just use some good video practice. You always want to keep your camera at about eye level, right? You don't want to be that person leaning over the camera so we're seeing your nose hairs. Bring your camera up a little bit. Make sure that the lighting is in front of you, not behind, or you'll just be this kind of blackened silhouette. And where you can, fill the frame. So sort of look at the edges and see what else is happening in your video so that you can get a good sense of your shoulders and body so that those gestures and body language can be part of the presentation as you're doing your recording. So this is one of the biggest questions that teachers struggle with in this environment. How much work should I be assigning? Well, in general, you want to plan about half the amount of content that you would have in a face-to-face classroom. If you think about people who traditionally homeschooled, they often talk about it only taking about 2 to 3 hours maybe to go through the academic content, and then the rest of the day can be spent in all of these other activities. So when you're working just one-to-one with kids in this kind of an environment, they can really do things much more quickly in some ways. So when you're thinking about your content, you want to think about stretching your curriculum rather than compacting it. Requiring frequent feedback from families, again, is really helpful. I mentioned, again, that kind of Goldilocks spot. You don't want things that are too easy or too hard. Personalize where you can. Differentiate for some students who may need more things to do, that they're ready for those challenges, or may need things a little bit less and cut back a bit and you need to go a little slower. Here's a general rule of thumb when you're thinking about content in a digital world. If there's anything new that you're introducing, new vocabulary, new words, you want to think about maybe about 1 minute per age. So let's take a kindergartner could watch a 5 minute video about the different types of clouds, whereas a high school student might be able to watch a 12 to 15 minute video about how clouds are formed and the content and the meteorological functions of that. Then you're going to choose an activity or an application. So you've introduced the new content. Now you want the kids to do something with that information, right? So that can be about double their age in minutes. So again, a kindergartner at about 5 years old could watch a 5 minute cartoon about the three different types of clouds and then maybe draw a picture for 10 minutes about that, or do some checks on things, or take some pictures and find some ways to put that, draw some pictures about it. Whereas a high school student could do maybe 30 minutes and they could write an essay, they could do some research, they could craft a project or a presentation to do something a little bit longer. And then as far as the number of total activities in the day, you want to think about half their grades. So the primary grades are going to do 1 or 2 activities a day in this kind of an environment, whereas the upper grades, again, might be able to do 4 or 5 activities within a single day. And again, that's rough, but that's just a good idea of thinking about all of the things that students have to do in order to access the material. Remember, the younger the kid, the more that they're also trying to practice all of the reading. They have to read all of the directions. They have to keyboard. It takes them that much longer to type. So there's just more kind of metacognition that has to happen in the digital environment. So that's one of the reasons you want to cut back on the actual content that you're assigning. I've mentioned a couple times about the importance of feedback. One of the things to think about again is maybe don't assign more than you can reasonably respond to in a day. Just as I mentioned that sometimes the teachers feel like they're just teaching out into this black hole, the students will feel that way too if they get online and they do all these things and then they never hear anything back from their teacher. So we know feedback is important in general in education, but in the digital world it becomes even more critical. Good rule of thumb is to think, don't let the sun go down on an assignment. Even again, if it's just a quick check-in, you can do longer comments, more formative things later on. But just to let the kids know that, yes, I've seen this, yes, you've completed this, we're good to go. So think about that. If you can't do all of that one day, then that might be one way to think about whether or not you're assigning too much. Do follow your district guidelines. We are getting recommendations and things from the state that, again, we're really thinking about formative assessments and not summative. That means thinking about just putting comments rather than putting scores. Think about it as you're just gathering data so you can kind of see what the kids are doing, how they're responding, who's struggling with the information, who's really mastered this. And when you go to present that information to families or to kids, really think more about being a mirror rather than being a hammer. You could say, hey, here are the opportunities that you still have to do some of these learning activities, rather than saying you're missing this and all of these assignments are gone and you're behind on all of these things. So just be sensitive when you're contacting kids and families about missing work, that families may be doing the best they can. Remember, again, all of those different situations in the home environment, and where you can extend that grace as well. Remember the old adage about how you can't pour from an empty cup on the airplane, that you put on your own oxygen mask first so that you can help other people. It's important for you, just as it is for the kids, to stay connected. Stay connected to your teaching team. Find your mentors, your marigold teachers, your best buddy from down the hallway, and get that peer support just for you as a person as well as for all the pedagogical stuff. Stay connected to your own family. Set some regular hours with breaks built in. This is a great time to stop and have a lunch hour with your own family and the people that may be in the home with you. Make sure that you do have a life away from your laptop. I really suggest having some fasting times from all screens, where you just put down the phone, put down the laptop, and go look at something beyond the four walls that you're living in these days. Be flexible with yourself. It will take time for you to adjust, for your students and families to adjust. Do allow yourself to make some mistakes and to do great reflection, and then make changes if you find something isn't working. We noticed at our school, for example, that students were not doing their elective work. They might be doing their math homework and they're coming to their English language arts online class, but then they were neglecting their art class. And we thought, particularly during the times that we're living in, the students need to have the wellness class, the art, the music programs. So one of the things we did is just adjust our schedule. And now Wednesdays is our dedicated Global Arts Day. And they have their academic core courses on Mondays and Tuesdays, and then on Thursdays and Fridays. But that Wednesday middle of the week time is a brain break where they get to make sure that we elevate how important these elective topics are and let the kids have time to work on that part of their learning as well. That also allowed for our academic teachers to have some downtime and to have some time that they could spend planning with each other and responding to all of the work that had been done. So it's okay to make changes, to really be creative in how you're using your scheduling. Be patient and gracious with everyone and make those adjustments. If you're finding that kids aren't showing up, this is again much easier than you could in the real world. Cancel your class that day and just spend a day doing phone calls. Just say one day, we're not going to worry online. I'm not going to make any online assignments, but I'm going to try to call every kid in my homeroom and just say hello and touch the families. If you have the permission and you have the stamina for it, do some drive-bys, show up at the end of their driveway and wave from a distance and have a conversation. Set a scavenger hunt for your class, have an online dance party. It's important, again, to keep those connections going, and that can mean letting go of some of the more academic things that you're worried about getting done. And finally, I just want to thank you from one educator to another. I know that you're out there doing the work. It may feel like it's impossible. It may feel like you're just doomed to failure from the start with all of this, that you can't possibly, but please know that you are doing the work. You are reaching out. You're doing what you're trying to do. You're learning and teaching new skills every day. I've had veteran teachers in tears saying they feel like they don't know anything about teaching in classrooms, that they're back to being their very first year of teaching again or worse. We know that you're doing your best. You're trying to provide quality instruction, and you're trying to do it in an entirely brand new way for most of us. And you're helping really to provide what may be the only stable relationship that our kids have in this midst of uncertainty. So thank you for all of the work that you're doing and that I know you're going to continue to doing for all of our students. Thanks.